Hi, my name is Sasha and this is Elizabeth and we're with Landlord Help Hub and we're so excited that you decided to take this course, How to Renew a Lease. You know, for every landlord who's had a great tenant, there may be times where you really want to keep them, avoid that turnover. Perhaps it's time to increase your rent, or maybe you have a terrible tenant and you need to decide,
Stay or go now.
do you want them to stay or do you want them to go? So you have so many things to consider when thinking about renewing a lease. So we're really, really excited that you decided to join this course. We're going to go over so many great things that are going to help you make your decision, and to include a lease renewal form and things like that. So we hope you enjoy the course.
Welcome to How to Renew Your Lease. So for many landlords, this is the best time. You have an amazing tenant. It's time to find a new tenant. And instead, you get to keep it. Yay! But what if it's not? What if you don't like the tenant? Or what if rents went up dramatically? Or what? Well, welcome to our course on how to renew your tenant. Let's get started. How to rent your house out, long-term rentals renewals. This is the best time. It's time to renew your lease. You made it a year or 2 years or 3 years or however long your initial lease, and it's time to renew the tenants. So let's talk about the value of the lease renewal. No vacancy, no turn costs, less stress. So let's discuss those in depth. When you have no vacancy, it means you have no in-between downtime. So if you have $1,200 a month is what your rent is, and you have 1 month's rent vacant, that means you have to raise rent $100 to get the same rent. So zero vacancy means all that money is in your pocket. No turn costs. Well, I'd love to tell you that a tenant moves out and it costs you no money even after a year. The reality is there's usually some kind of turn cost.
What are some of those kind of turnover costs? Like, what would you consider a turnover cost?
I mean, paint, carpet, cleaning. But like, what if you have nothing? What if you have the perfect tenant, right? Well, I've always believed that you need to go out and be there personally after a terrible experience and like do it yourself. So even if they're perfect, you got Mary Poppins, you still have to pay your plane fare, your rental fee, and all of that to show up and be there. So personally, there's always something. There's a little bit of cleaning, there's a ding. You might not have known about the broken handle on the sink. That's not their fault. They just forgot to tell you. There's always something. And it's always stressful because you got to find a new tenant.
Yeah, and I think sometimes those turnover costs also can equate to, like, sometimes my long distance rentals, I count on the tenant who's moving in to kind of assess some of the situation and tell me if maybe something is drastically wrong. Then yeah, you're right. I would have to fly out there and take a look or spend time. Sometimes the cost of turnover is not just money, it's your time. So I have to maybe spend more time on the phone or doing virtual calls or photographs or talking with vendors, things like that.
I will tell you, I'm a huge believer of like being there for turnover. I remember 1 year, a couple years ago, was my first time that I've ever had to go to court over a turnover. I didn't show up. I did all the other houses, but it was an amazing tenant. We had an amazing support team. I didn't see any reason to. It went terribly. And I think a lot of those problems were because I didn't show up. So personally, I always show up on turnover unless I can't, but it saved me so much money, time, and heartache. So I'm a really big believer that when you can put eyes on it and you can see it, it just saves so much, because in my case, everybody blamed each other. And then it didn't help that that year was not my house's year. And we had a leak and we had this and we had that issue. And so it kind of like started off bad and then it just kept going.
So if you're thinking, should I renew or should I not renew, considering the cost of turning the property over to a new tenant is something to consider.
Absolutely. But let's also talk about this. Yes, there's cost to turning over a tenant, but there's cost to a terrible tenant. The reality is problem tenants typically don't get better. Things typically only get worse. So if you renew someone that you know is only a problem, it typically just means more of a headache. And the problem is, the reality is, the longer somebody is in the house, the more damage, more wear and tear, the more whatever is driving you nuts can continue.
Yeah, and we do see on threads, social media threads from time to time, is if there is a tenant that maybe doesn't care for you as a landlord, sometimes they do damage out of spite. So if that's going to be a situation that you think you might have to go through, then why not just rip the Band-Aid off and go ahead and not renew their lease?
But it is also important to like evaluate like why they're driving you nuts. Some things can be corrected in the renewal itself. Some things, grass isn't greener on the other side, and you just learn to smile. You know, you don't have to respond to every text message, but sometimes it is worth not renewing. And that is what's important for you to figure out the why.
Well, and you bring up a good point. A renewal time is not only a time where you can address the term of your lease, but you can address, are there any addendums that I want to add to go forward? So have there been any points of contention in my current lease that I want to go ahead and address in the renewal so that we both, the tenant and the landlord, have an understanding of how that new term is going to go?
Yeah, like I know people who remove maintenance, like yard maintenance. I know when they've like, say there's always pest control issues and that's a contention, you make it the tenant's responsibility. Like this is a great time to reevaluate. As I always say, I hate getting the call of let's talk about it, but this is the time to talk about it. Everything is up for renegotiation, and this is your time to say your piece or hold your piece. Okay, so let's discuss how to renew a tenant. So first you need to decide on rent, stay the same or raise. Then you need to send out a renewal notice. Once they agree, you need to send out the renewal, and then once signed, you're done. So it sounds really simple, but let's take a minute and talk about each of the steps.
First, you need to decide on rent. You know, markets change over time. We talked a little bit about this in another one of our courses about setting the price for your rental. You need to look at your competition and understand what homes are available and price yourself, you know, in that market. Also, you know, sometimes, I don't know, everyone has a little bit different philosophy. If you do have that tenant who goes above and beyond and you've done inspections on the property and everything's being well maintained, you know, that is something that cost of turnover, I take that into consideration. So like if I've had a great tenant for years, I might try to relist the house for more than I would raise their rent. That's not always a popular opinion, but I wouldn't say I put a huge margin in there. I think that I keep my rentals extremely competitive in the pricing despite a renewal or a new tenant. So I try to keep that like a healthy balance.
I would say a couple of things though. You know, I think you need to understand your tenant. Like I have a couple of friends that are like, I never up it. I'm like, okay, but they typically don't have 7 to 15-year tenants. I also have a friend who like lost her family home because they never upped the tenant rent in 25 years. And so they couldn't afford to keep it up to date. And so like they had to put a roof, and like ultimately for all of her trying, like she lost the family home. So here's the thing. You need rent money to pay the bills and the expenses. And if you let
those go up
and those go out, and if you let the rent from the market go from like 21 to 3,500, that jump, A, you're going to lose them. B, you're going to have hard feelings. And C, like you lost all that ability to maintain your home. And even if that tenant is okay with it, you can't do it for the next person. So I don't keep it necessarily always like exactly at value, but I try really hard to keep it within 5 to 10% simply because I want to keep them. And the only way I can keep them is if I can raise it. People are way more understanding when you raise it 50 to $100 every single year than if you raise it $250 to $500 on the 5th year. Like you're going to get way more grief if you do that. You also aren't going to get any like understanding or discounts or any of that stuff because you're $1,000 under market. They're not going to be like, oh, don't worry, I'll go put that new AC in for you. Like you need to maintain your home. So I'm a huge believer in looking at market. I usually give my tenants a slight discount, you know, maybe 4, 5, 6, 10%, depending on it. Maybe at market, depending on the market. I don't always raise it. Like I have a tenant this year, I'm not raising. There's no reason to raise it.
Market indicator.
Because it's market. Yeah. But I think it's important to understand that. I also think it's important to understand that just because your insurance and your taxes and everything else goes up doesn't mean you can to raise your rent. My taxes, insurance, all of that went up. That house has broken a whole bunch. We've invested a lot of money into it, and rent's going to be exactly the same this year.
Why are you going to keep your rent the same?
Because it's the same.
Because that's what the market indicates.
Yeah, the market
No
hasn't
one
gone up.
cares how much your interest rate is. No one cares how much you paid in maintenance. No one cares, that you have something.
And that's on both
high
sides. No one cares when you can't move up the rent, and no one cares when you do move it up. So treat this like a business. We've said this repeatedly throughout all of our courses. This is a business. Check the market, raise it to the market, and send it. We've included some of our templates. We included our emails. It just says like, congratulations, we're so excited. Thank you for being with us for the year. We can't believe time has flown out so high. We look forward to it. Here's the market.
Well, and I think you and I have discussed, we actually have a different approach to renewals.
Yeah, we do.
We actually do. So we operate in a little bit of different markets, but we also operate a little bit differently when it comes to this. So like a difference would be, I reach out extremely early, as early as possible, like maybe probably 90-ish days in advance of the lease expiration, at least 90 days, probably more like 120.
Yeah.
I try to reach out early because what I reach out with is in the body of my email, I say like, hey, heads up, your lease is expiring on X date. And unless I hear from you, I'm not renewing it. So that kind of, I feel for me, that keeps me in the driver's seat. Like you have to be out of the house, tenant, by that date. That's the date you agreed to be out. Unless I hear back from you, I'm assuming that's what's happening. Instead of me waiting for them, I just go ahead and tell them what the expectation is because we already agreed to it in the lease. Now, I caveat that with a lot of niceties in the message, about if you let me know if you'd like to renew, I'd love to keep you as a tenant. The rent will be X dollar, X dollars a month. And please let me know by this many days in advance. And I even offer to help if they are moving. I might even offer to help work on like a move out date, that if I can find a tenant, if they need to negotiate a little bit on the move out date. But that's me and that's my market and that's what works for me.
So just to remind you, her markets are Southern California and DC area. Just for a reminder for our people. So for our audience, for me,
very hot market.
Very hot markets. I can't do that in my markets. That does not work. I'm in Central California and Southern Maryland. So like my markets, that doesn't work. So what I do the opposite. I email them, say, time has flown by. I can't believe it's renewal time. We're so excited to have you. We enjoyed having you. Thank you so much. If there's something that we need to like alter, we'll be like, we're going to renew it, but like you're in charge of pest control or whatever the issue is. And then we're like, rent this year is this amount of money. I also do it 90 to 120 days out. You need to let us know by 60 days out. And then at like 60 days, if we don't hear, then we will send a notice of non-renewal and we will move on. So like, we don't let anybody control the situation. And we usually, try to give ourselves a few days and we set up the path. We do it about 90. So we give them about 30 days to think about it. We don't do instant renewals. That's not our strategy.
Neither do we. Ours just expire.
And we go on. We have month-to-month clauses that if they won't sign a renewal, we go up $500. That's why her strategy of like non-renewal is good. Ours, depending on the market, it's harder. And like that style just doesn't work in our area.
But I think it's worth talking about because like as we talk about these things, I'm like, oh, okay, and that's how we learn.
Yeah.
So.
And I think it's also, you have to also understand like we each have our different like personalities, right? Like if you put me in Sasha's body, I probably couldn't be Sasha because it's not like how I do things, right? And she couldn't be me. So the biggest thing that I've learned in real estate is like you do you. Like you will figure out what works. A friend of mine, like automatic renewals, she reminds everybody and then it renews. And like if they want out, it's break lease. She loves it. Somebody else like you auto do it. You have to figure out what works for you. And then we always send out that renewal notice. I do mine through DocuSign. I got a lot of people that are, all over the world. And we find that works the easiest. We pre-fill it out. They hit the sign button and then we're good if they want the terms. We also make sure that we bold things. So like we once had a tenant that we allowed a renewal, but we decided later we didn't want to do as a renewal anymore, like later on that we were only going to do for 2 years. So we put in big red letters, like a reminder that like we are not renewing it past 2022 of May, and big bold letters. Not only did we do it in the notice itself, we did it in the email. Guess what he read and guess what he didn't read. But at least he saw the email. So I highly recommend if you're going to change something, you put it in multiple places, in bold, in red, in underline, so people catch it.
Well, and I think, we talk a little bit about when we talk about how to write a lease, really going over the lease with the tenant. It's the same idea when you're doing a renewal. You really want to go through it with the tenant and make sure that you're both on the same page because it is a binding contract.
Yep.
So once it's signed, you're done. They've renewed.
Yep.
And we have given for this course a couple of renewal examples. So be sure to check their written materials for those.
And some people do a whole new lease, unless you're going to change a whole lot. You do you, again, no legal advice, know your state, know your local area, all that. I have never done a full lease in my entire 12-year, to my remembering. It's been a long week. I cannot remember of a single time that I didn't do just a simple one-page renewal. I think the most I've ever had is 3 changes. If I was like rewriting the lease, absolutely. But I've never had to put more than like 3 changes in it. So it's never been more than like C below. So we talked about why the increase was good. And we talked about the expenses, and we talked about why, landlords undervalued houses. I really just want to stress, please don't not renew because you're afraid of people's feelings. The only person protecting your house is yourself. So we talked about some ways to renew your lease, the automatic lease, the one-page renewal, and like the entire new lease. I also want to stress, you need to know your areas. We operate in different areas. We also are, one-man band shows. The people that I know that do the automatic lease are property management
Well,
companies.
explain what an automatic lease is for those who might not know what that means.
So automatic lease, in the lease, it says that your lease will continue to renew every year until you give 60 days notice from 60 days before it. So like, say my lease is ending January 1st, I would owe notice by October 31st that I was moving out. And if I gave it November 4th, I would have to give a 2-month break lease fee and a 2-month notice because I was outside of my 60-day window.
So it just keeps going
Perpetually.
And then, so that's just you would need to follow whatever is in the lease if you decided that you as a landlord wanted to discontinue the tenancy, or if the tenant wanted to discontinue with you.
So usually what you see in these kind of leases, stereotypically, is you see a 5, 10, 3, some amount of automatic increase. It just happens. Like it exists. Sometimes 10, whatever.
Like a percentage?
Yeah, percentage. Okay. So usually these leases have a pre-made percentage, and then it automatically renews, and then it just keeps going until someone gives notice within the time frame that it allows. You often see 30 days instead of 60s. I mostly saw these when I was working in apartments. The only time I've done a new lease was at Renewal with my roommate house. We had a whole bunch of new roommates come in and out because of SCRA. And during the middle of the time, we let them just do it. They could SCRA their way out, and then they would bring someone else in. And this is way back when I was really young and still learning. But at that point, we did a brand new lease because it was like all new people.
Well, tell our viewers, what is SCRA?
Oh, Sailors Relief Act.
It basically means that active duty people who get stationed with beyond a certain mileage threshold of where they're currently stationed, they have certain protections for being able to get out of leases. So if you have a roommate situation, SCRA may apply to you, and you may have a tenant turnover in the middle of a lease and need to rewrite a whole new lease if you've had a certain number of turnover.
So if you have the same people, then yes, you should write a renewal. We don't have that many roommate groups anymore, although we just got our first one again. So then that's where that typically happens.
I did not mean to put you on the spot with acronyms,
Okay.
but also I'd like to say in the one-page renewal, it sounds like, oh, it's just one page, but I mean, at least for my one-page renewal, it addresses the date of the original lease.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about when the original lease is expiring. And then it talks about this is an addendum, or this is a renewal for, the day after the termination of the original lease, and then what term going forward. And then you, like we had said before, if there's certain things you want to change below that, you could say, original lease, or, see section 1, part A, and you could list anything that you're going to change from the original lease. So a one page can cover a lot of things, actually, if you don't
Mine does.
If you don't want to get too complicated.
Mine even has the addendum number, like 1, 2, 3, 4.
It really does a good job.
Okay, so this talks about the automatic renewals, pros, less hassle, no need to recalculate market rent, because again, they typically already put like a 5 or 10%. You know, let's take a second to talk about how you calculate that market rent. Typically, I, like Sasha, have been looking all year round and kind of assessing what that rent is. Now, I will say that you need to understand your market. I think we've said this over and over, and you need to understand your legals. What I see part of a group that's out of Southern California, and what I see a lot from that group is that they put in autos because auto and like an amount because they don't have a choice. It's like they're in the Bay Area or they're in this county and this is their amount that they can increase rent and it is what it is. And so they just do that. So 5, 10, 6%, whatever it is, however it's calculated, it's just automatically done.
Like very somewhat predictable.
They don't have a choice. So until the tenant moves out, they can't raise rent because it's rent controlled. So in rent control areas, it's very predictable because it is what it is.
I think for me, I don't have any homes in rent controlled areas, so I haven't had to deal with that, good or bad. I think that like you, I study my markets year round and take note of, which properties are comparable to mine by bedrooms and baths, and kind of just keep an eye on what the market is doing so that I'm not ever caught off guard at renewal time. I already have a plan before I even send a notice to a client that a tenant, that their lease's expiration date is coming.
And I don't like these because I feel like you have a lot of grumpy people. We saw them a lot in apartment complexes, and we find that people forget and then they want to move out or whatever, and they don't feel like they consented. And so it's just not worth the grumpiness for them feeling like you pulled wool over their eyes because you didn't tell them that they were renewing their lease. I mean, it's a written agreement, but like it's reality.
So could someone not to put you on the spot, but could someone what term can they automatically renew for? Can they automatically renew for like another year, 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, just automatically renews indefinitely.
Just for a set term that they agreed to at the beginning?
No, it's not a set term. It just says that like every year on the 12th month anniversary, it'll renew for the next year until you get 30 days notice within that 11th month.
Yeah, so that could really that could put someone on the line for a long time.
I mean, it does. I mean, you see it a lot in apartment complexes. Again, I haven't seen it for years and years and years, but I've seen it in the groups when we got into a debate, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago, there was a huge debate on military landlord. There was a couple people, I'm thinking of one specifically, and she loved it. I also saw it a lot when I worked in a luxury apartment. Like it's not popular. It's just something that I don't want grumpy tenants. I'm sure we're gonna later talk about like, determining to keep tenants or not to keep tenants. And I want you to value and like my house. I'm not necessarily Sasha who are going to say goodbye and then see if you
say
really
goodbye. I just give a heads up because I don't want to be the person who's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize what date my lease is expiring. I'm like, well, I'm going to be there to help tell you.
Also had like somebody who like dragged their heels and
very much. Like, I learned the hard way.
She learned the hard way. So like she now like does it in my area. If you don't respond to me by like day 65, then I give you a non-renewal. So like I control the process.
You'll learn and you'll learn what works in your market. And I mean, I think it's also a person to person, if you have a certain type of relationship with your tenant, how you approach them and how they approach you.
Oh, absolutely. So. And you also have to understand like what you're dealing with.
Yeah, definitely. So like we talked about, the 1-page renewal, we make it sound really simple, but it does actually have a lot of components to it that are necessary. So like I said, we do have in the written materials examples for you to use. Again, we are not lawyers, so you do need to check with your state, and local laws to make sure if there is some requirement at renewal time, you need to do it. If there is a certain requirement in your renewal documents, you need to do that so that you're following the proper laws. And
you need to check because some areas, the longer you do, they have different tenancies, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things like keep in mind, I think California, I think it's 13 months. I think it's 12 months. It might be 18. Don't like check the law, but like if they've been with you over a year, you just give them 60 days notice versus 30 days. Also, I think it's Washington. Again, please don't quote me on all of this, but I think Washington State, if it was like so many years long, you had to get it notarized. So if we can't stress enough, like you need to go look up your individual like laws to see what's applicable to you in your house.
Yeah, each state definitely has different requirements. You see that a lot on the different forums too. one person in one state will ask a question and someone in a different state will be like, well, this is how you do it. And then the third person chimes in is like, well, no, not in that state. So it is really important that there's not just, there's like a general timing, well, not even timing. There's a general formality to renewals, but the timing and the documents come from a very legal, very specific state legal corner of the process. So yeah, definitely make sure that you follow up with your states. I think it might be California as well. If someone has lived in your home for a certain amount of time and they're going to move out, granted, that's not a renewal, but they have to basically waive that they are or aren't on premise while you're doing the walkthrough or something like that. Again,
you have to give them
quote me.
initial inspection.
Yeah.
So basically California has a weird thing that says it no earlier than 2 weeks, no later than as late as deemed possible, that you have to give them right to initial inspection. And then
They give them time to fix
give you
anything.
time to fix. And like, it's a whole thing.
But that's just I'm not trying to convolute the situation, but it's just another example of your states are different.
The point is there's 50 states, at least 2 territories, depending on how we want to get into all of that. And every single one of them are very different. So we're giving you a rough idea of what we do, and we operate in 4 different states.
Yeah.
4 different states thought. You know, some people just like the crisp new lease. Everybody gets back on board. Everybody signs a new lease. They've been altering it. They haven't been altering it. But some people just enjoy that brand new lease. There's no discussion. There's no reminder that they might not have remembered the right word in the one-page renewal. It's just crisp, new, and easy done.
Or maybe the landlord has a better lease and they didn't have it at the time. Maybe they were hasty to find a tenant because they had some life situation going on and they did the best lease that they could. And maybe now upon renewal, they have a better lease.
Just make sure you have full disclosure. I think a lot of people like the one page because there's no misunderstanding or sneaking something in.
Yeah.
You're gonna do a whole new lease because you learn, or let's say your tenant keeps letting the dog out and you're like, if you don't put that dog in on the leash, we're not renewing you. And they're like, I swear, I swear, I swear. That is a great place to put it in writing with consequences. Like every time we get a mailer from the HOA, you have to pay the $300 fee and you have to pay a fine for us dealing with it. I don't know. Again, look at local rules, but this is also your time. Put it all in writing. If you think that they're going to get better next year because of such and such happened and you're giving them leniency, put it in writing. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen.
Very true. And that might be an example when you would do an entire new lease.
Okay, so what if they want to renew you on your terms? So we have talked a couple of times about how we have different strategies and styles, right? So both of us have had experience where that's too expensive. Market isn't that. I shouldn't have a renewal. I'm in here.
I've done this for you and that for the property, and I've improved this thing, and the lawn looks better than when I moved in.
And I should have, not only do I want an increase, but it should decrease.
Yeah.
I don't care that the market.
Or the utilities are more than I thought they'd be. I'm struggling with my budget.
So here's the thing.
Yeah.
I can't think of a specific situation today that I have lowered the rent. I feel like I've done it once. I cannot remember the situation. I know I have had friends who have done it and they've lowered the rent. And here's the reality. This is your business. This is for you. I had a friend who lowered the rent because she was moving on deployment and it made sense for her to line up their time. And so taking $100 discount, she still was clearing rent, was more of a stress reliever than raising rent. And everybody was happy to be on a month-to-month versus another year lease. Worked for her. So yes, I'm not saying you don't negotiate or you don't act with grace, but I'm saying that you don't let anybody bully you. When that happens, when they tell me that number, I want 2,000, well, I'm only signing for 17. No problem. Thank you so much for being in our house. We really appreciate working with you. Please take this as your non-renewal, 60 days notice. We're going to start renting it out. And I send the whole thing of let's move on to the next one that Sasha sent in the beginning. And now I move on and start finding a new tenant. I've only had to do that
Yeah, I know. I feel like we're talking about renewals as if they're like kind of doom and gloom, but I've always had like really positive experiences at
I mean,
renewal time.
most people like I send out my hey, awesome. And like I also always look at what houses are available right then. Because here's the other
Yeah.
thing. When you have that one that you're like, all the houses have been going for 35, 35, 35, and then right when you go to renewal and everybody's 29, 29, 29, it's gonna be really hard to get 3,500 when everybody's 29.
Timing matters though, and I think we talk about that in other realms of being a landlord. Timing matters. What's on the market is your competition at the current time. So the coulda, shoulda, woulda is no one really cares about that. It's like because if your tenant, but your tenant also has things on the line too. So if your tenant doesn't want to renew with you, then they're going to have to pay to move themselves. They're going to have to pay to get carpets clean. They're going to have to pay to do certain things. So it definitely could be a win-win situation to come to a negotiation at renewal time.
And I've had times where I was really nervous. We had a tenant where like the house wouldn't rent, the house wouldn't rent, the house wouldn't rent. So we ended up having to lower it $200, right? And I think the first year we raised it 50, but they were with us for 5 years, and over 5 years we raised the rent $600. And honestly, it probably should have gone up a whole lot more than that to about 2,800. So $800, but we brought it up 600. So like, it's not that you can't raise it. What we would just recommend is like, instead of like going from like 19 to 25 on year 4, because you didn't do it 1, 2, 3, and 4 to do it.
Increments are better.
So we find increments. So that's why, and if they are going to fight you over a $50 or $100 and it really went up $300, you're not going to be able to raise it next year. So that might be a really good time to figure out when is good for you and to send out that non-renewal. My biggest recommendation is to make sure that no one bullies you. We both had experiences, which is why we like really believe in being the front of the situation. But like, your house, your decision. If you don't want them, unless you have to keep them because you're in a specific area, that's what a non-renewal is for. List the property, get started finding a new tenant. And you know what? If you can't remember, come follow our series. We walk you through every step of the way.
Definitely. And I do think that, it's great that if you do decide to renew a tenant, it must mean that you have a good relationship with them and that they are in some degree taking good care of your property, paying on time. So congratulations. You've done that. You've made it through a whole term of a lease or two. So there is something to be said for that. It's actually renewal time is a success time in many ways.
Yeah.
So good luck. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. There are written materials in this course, like I had mentioned before, so feel free to use those.
So we truly believe that the huge value of this course not only is what we're talking about, it's one of our smaller courses, like in our talking time. But what we try to do is, I don't know about you, but like for me and Sasha, coming up with all the documents, giving the examples and the emails and all of that was the hardest part. So we made this its own course that we could include all of these documents as an example. They're nothing other than an example, but we wanted to show you what we do and what we did. And so we hope that you'll find it helpful.
Yeah, a starting point for you. Thank you for taking this course, and we look forward to seeing you in our community.